Hello and welcome. I'm Marian Pyle. Thanks for joining us here at Winning at Love. This uplifting video series is designed to honor God and provide guidance and encouragement to Christian singles about dating, romance, and finding the right partner in life. Winning at Love brings you 8 deeply personal and inspiring testimonies told by Christian couples who took a risk, faced their fears, persevered through the setbacks, and won the heart of the one they loved. We trust you'll be blessed. Here now is Winning at Love.
Winning at Love, spirit-filled stories about dating and romance.
Growing up with a father in the U.S. Air Force meant that Mark lived in 5 different countries and 12 cities before settling in Los Angeles. An extrovert by nature, he became an actor, studied at the New York Academy of Dramatic Arts, and later honed his craft working summer stock, off-Broadway, soap operas, and commercials. Mark then moved to Los Angeles to pursue work in the entertainment industry, where he expanded from acting into directing and also co-founded a Christian theater group. One day at church, Mark felt inspired to do short-term missions. He hoped to be sent to Europe or Hawaii, but instead, the Lord directed Mark to Guatemala, the very last place on his list. He agreed grudgingly, unaware that the Lord was about to give him one of the biggest blessings of his life, but not before it brought him literally to his knees. Cindy grew up in Oregon with 3 older brothers. Home life was not always easy, but her faith had pulled her through and solidified her heart for a life in Christian ministry. After high school, Cindy moved to Los Angeles to study at Life Pacific College. She became a licensed minister and got hired at Church on the Way. While here, Cindy signed up for a short-term missions trip and was assigned to go to Guatemala. She was absolutely thrilled, and without a clue that God had secret answers to her prayer waiting for her, answers that were not just life-changing, but also wonderfully funny. This is Mark and Cindy.
Well, I had sort of a reprobate life as growing up. I was kind of wild and woolly and did whatever I wanted to, and then I accepted the Lord when I was 25 years old. Actually, on my 25th birthday, you can believe that. And I was living in New York, working as an actor and doing stuff, and I started really getting into God. After I accepted Jesus, I went all out in a pursuit of study and wanting to know everything I could about my Savior. At the time, my agent had sent me to LA for a pilot season. So I was out here. Anyway, I found myself at the Church on the Way, and I was really seeking God on what He wanted to do with my life. And that year, our church was sending out missionary teams to Guatemala and Israel and Hawaii and England. And I'm like, every one of those will be fine except Guatemala. I'm not going to Guatemala, Lord. Everyone but Guatemala will be fine for me. So I went to the first meeting, and there was an application, and you were supposed to choose one of these. And I'm like, Hawaii, England, yeah, I don't. And I felt God say, Guatemala. I'm like, you got to be kidding. I'm not going to Guatemala. No, you're going to Guatemala. No. So reluctantly, I checked the Guatemala box and went to the meeting for Guatemala. There was a little bit of worship at the beginning, and I heard this like angelic voice behind me singing. And I turned around, and I saw Cindy. The first time I laid eyes on her, and she didn't see me at all. She was worshiping God. She was in the moment. I went, wow, she's cute. Back to worshiping God. And anyway, later on at the interview process, we found each other standing outside in the hallway waiting to be interviewed, and we engaged in conversation. At the time, I was seeing 2 other girls who also went to the Church on the Way. So there were some uncomfortable moments when we would gather in the singles, because there's 3 girls. And one time, God is so funny, we were sitting in the same row, right next to each other. And I really felt God used the words, I felt this impression, the one on your left. Because the other two were sitting here and Cindy was sitting here. We both got selected to go to the Guatemala team. And as we went through our training, we were spending a lot of time with each other in our training. And so we kind of started dating. There was an Amy Grant concert, and I asked her to go. But we were with several other people. So it wasn't really,
It was a group dating.
It was a group dating. It was a group dating. And since we kind of felt good about that, and so we did it a few more times with sort of group settings, and kind of felt like we were almost an item. I mean, we weren't really there yet, but this was kind of cool. And then I was at church on a Sunday, and kind of looking around for her, and I saw her sitting like next to somebody else, another guy. And I wasn't sure about that. And I thought, wait a second, what's going on? And the whole church, I was like, I didn't even hear what the pastor was saying. I was over there going, oh my gosh, how did this happen? I'm starting to fall for somebody, and now she's sitting with somebody else. And so, but right after church, we had our training for Guatemala. And it usually started where we'd meet and have lunch somewhere, and then we'd go back to church and do some things. Well, so we met at this restaurant, and there we are. And this guy wasn't there because he wasn't on the team, and Cindy was there, and she was all bubbly like her normal self. And so I said, well, can I get a ride with you back to church? She's like, okay. So we got in the car. Do you remember this? And so we started driving back. I said, pull over. And she goes, what? I said, pull over. So she pulled over, and I stopped, and I looked at her, and I said, you're my girlfriend. It's you and me. It's not this other guy over there. You and me you're my girlfriend. And she was just like looking at me, and she just went, okay. And from then on, we started dating each other. It had been settled. If you're pursuing God, He'll let you know when it's right. I really, and however He does that with different people, He'll let you know that this is the one. I believe that. And we're getting closer to leave on our Guatemala trip. And I just dropped her off, and I was driving home. And as I was pulling onto the 101 freeway at White Oak going south, I had a moment with God in my car. And God told me, she's the one. Ask her to marry you in Guatemala. And I didn't really understand the significance of that. But at first I was glad, because I was starting to feel that anyway. I was really starting to feel that Cindy was the one. But to have, and it wasn't audible, but that's the sense that I had. To have that sort of confirmation was great. We go to Guatemala, and I was really poor. And so I didn't have, I sort of scraped up all the money I could with support and everything else just to get to go to Guatemala, but I didn't have money for a ring, or I didn't, And so I was telling one of my friends this, and I was telling my pastor that, and sort of what I wanted to do, and that I really felt like I was supposed to ask Cindy to marry her in Guatemala. And so we would do our missionary stuff during the daytime. We had a medical clinic, we did evangelism, all that stuff during the daytime. And then we had like an hour for dinner, and then we'd go back in the evening. And so in this hour, I was like plying the streets of Guatemala with my Spanish-speaking friends to figure out a way to get a ring made for Cindy so that I could ask her to marry me with something. And a friend of mine gave me a gold ring. Said, you can probably have this melted down. And blah, blah. So we had this, every day it was like this clandestine sort of thing, and this 1 hour of time. And anyway, I got it. I got the ring, and it's like, oh my gosh. And so after our missionary, we were there for 3 weeks doing missionary work, and then we had a couple of days free before we went back to the States. Well, so I had this ring, and I had it in a ring box. I really wanted to present it to her. So that night we were up in the mountains of Guatemala at this place called Lake Atitlan, which is a volcanic lake, full moon, just picture like postcard perfect, just gorgeous. And so we had dinner. I didn't want to give it away by having this big ring box in my tight pants, because you'd see it. And then if I put it in my pocket, you'd see it. So I'm like, I had this dilemma. What am I going to do with the ring? Because I want to completely surprise her. She had no idea. So I was wearing the plants I had, even though they were tight, they had pleats. I thought, well, I can hide it in the pleat somehow. I said, well, if I put it in like right in the pleat, and like the waistband on my underwear will hold it in place, it'll be in the pleat and you won't see it. And so the whole meeting, I mean, the whole dinner, you know, we're talking and we're having dinner. And I said, listen, let's walk down by the lake afterwards. Okay. So we're walking along the lake, full moon shining on the lake. It's idyllic. It's picture perfect. And so we sit down, and I'd written her a letter, and I read the letter to her, you know, and all of this stuff. And then here's the moment. And I said, Cindy, I want you to close your eyes. She said, okay. And so I go for the ring, but it slipped. And it wasn't where it was. And so I'm reaching in my pocket, and I can't get to it through my pocket. And it's like, and so I had no other choice but to unzip. So I asked her to close her eyes, and she hears me unzip my pants, and I'm like reaching around down trying to find the ring. So I find the ring. And I'm kneeling down, okay? And so she opens it, and I forgot to zip up. so I'm like kneeling and trying to hide that part. And so anyway, she said yes, if you can believe that. And I did zip up. And then I was so nervous because I had no way to size her ring, and I'd had this ring made. I had no way to size her, so I was guessing. And like I would like feel, you know, we'd be holding hands, and I'd be like feeling her finger, going, okay, it's about that big. And then I try and memorize, you know, it's about like so anyway. So I started to put it on her finger. I said, I don't know if this is gonna fit. And she's like, it's gonna fit, it's gonna fit. She's like, so anyway, that was our abbreviated courtship story. But the way God weaved all of this together, I'll let you talk about.
Unlike Mark, I came from a Christian home, and pretty sheltered in a lot of ways. And so when I met Mark, I was scared to death of him. He was an actor. You know, actors are worldly. You know, you don't have anything to do with actors. But thankfully, before I had met Mark, God had done a lot in my life, and which is another whole long story. But I came to realize that what an industry where they really needed believers. And I met some other people that were in the entertainment industry that were quality believers. So at least I was somewhat open, you know, and but I was still pretty scared to death of Mark. When I was 12 years old, our church had sent some missionaries to Guatemala to help rebuild the city after a devastating earthquake. And so I had kind of taken Guatemala on as my prayer country. And I would pray for Guatemala like every day. I just knew that someday I would go to Guatemala, that my feet would, be on Guatemalan soil. I didn't know how, I didn't know why, or, how the circumstances would be, but I knew one day I would go to Guatemala. I had gone to Bible college, and everyone, it's funny, they always say, oh, you'll find a husband in Bible college, but I didn't. And, but that was okay. It was like, I just kept trusting the Lord. The day that we'd gone to lunch with the whole team, and he asked for a ride back to the church with me and told me to pull over, I was stunned, and I was still a little scared, but what I realized was he was a man of decision. And I had been around so many wishy-washy guys that it was so refreshing. It was like, you're my girl and that's it. And there was something that was so, women like security, and that it was securing in a way that it was like he'd made a decision and he was going to go for that. And I really saw that as a wonderful quality. And so when we went to Guatemala, I was starting to feel like that he was the one. But I thought, it's still kind of new, even though it was 4 months that we did all this training. And it was funny, our pastor, he took us both aside and you're on a mission team and you need to be careful. And of course we would, adhere to that and submit to that. But we could also tell, and he was very kind, and that he was really for the relationship too. And that did a lot for me. So when we went to Guatemala, I thought, at the end of the summer, the last thing in my mind was that he would propose to me when we were in Guatemala. But the night that we went to dinner and then walked down, and it was just full moon on the lake. You wouldn't believe it. It was more than I could have imagined to be proposed to. It was like, I hadn't thought of it before, but everything lined up. The dots connected, that I had prayed for Guatemala, that God sent me to Guatemala, and he was giving me my husband. It was just overwhelming. And incredibly, incredibly exciting. And I was still, I was thrilled beyond belief. But when we got back, then I was scared. What have I done? And I was really still scared because I hadn't known him that long. And I was still, he's an actor. And, I was pretty scared about that. And our pastor, he was really good again. He said, look, you're going through pre-marriage. Have you set a date? And Mark was going to start school in the fall, and so he was going to be in school a year, just about 9 months. And so we were going to wait for that first year to pass, so get married afterwards. So we had an 11-month engagement. So he was like, you have 11 months. You're going to go through pre-marriage. Just don't freak out, And so during those 11 months, it was God just confirmed it and confirmed it and confirmed it. And to this day, just the amazing thing of me praying for Guatemala all those years and then being given my husband at the same time was pretty incredible.
And that's why I was supposed to ask her in Guatemala.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Winning at Love. For more episodes, information, and resources, please visit us at winningatlove.tv. That's winningatlove.tv, not .com. And if you found it helpful, be sure and tell a friend. Stay with us now as we share some very special bonus segments you won't want to miss. In Ephesians 5, God talks about Christ is the head of the church, the man is the head of the wife, and then the wife and the husband together are the head of the family. The thing that's so obvious to us is if you have healthy relationships, you can have healthy families. And if you have healthy families, you can have healthy communities. And if you have healthy communities, you can build a healthy nation. So part of our intent here with this series is to encourage people, give them some helpful godly wisdom about how they might be conducting their affairs, how they might honor the Lord with their choices, with their heart, and with whoever they decide is going to be their partner in life, because there are consequences to our decisions and who we pick. We pick the wrong person. We both picked the wrong persons when we first got married, the first time, but we didn't know the Lord then. So in fact, I think it was you who said once, the first one I picked, the second husband God picked, right? And that's the perfect way to put it. When God picks it for you, picks the people in your life for you, they're there to be an absolute blessing and to be a complement to your life.
Ephesians was my was a book that I went back to numerous times in the pursuit, and then since, because God said, love her as Christ loved the church, even to lay down your life for her. And right. So that was a really strong principle in our courtship.
The other big difference is that when you're a Christian, you don't need to lean on the other person to fill all your needs. God fills your needs, and then you overflow to the other person. That is a completely different paradigm of marriage than from the world, because you meet someone, you think they're going to be a great fit for you, and then when things change, they're not a good fit for you anymore, and then they disappoint you and all of that. But when you are grounded in the Lord and you're being filled up by the Holy Spirit and you know who you are, even when that you go through tough times, and you do, you're two different personalities, you're two people that are still in progress. You have fights, you have disagreements, but you can overflow with the Lord's grace and love and forgiveness and just get back on the rails and keep going. That's a huge difference to Christian couples. Yes, that's such a good question.
Well, for the male, and I'll let her speak to the female, but to the male is to put God first and honor God's desire for you to be a pursuer, just as Christ pursued the church. You're to honor her and pursue her as Christ pursued the church. And that means that you also stay pure during that, before you meet her and during the time of courtship. You just stay celibate during that time, and God will honor that commitment.
I think another thing that we think is really important for singles of any age is accountability, and to not do it alone, to not date people like in your own little vacuum. We had a community of people around us, and they could speak into, Russ and I didn't have family here, so I didn't have anyone to ask, like, I don't know his family, he doesn't know my family. No one could say to me, he comes from a good family or he doesn't or whatever. But the community of people that knew him could speak loudly about him. I got a lot of information about Russell from his church and from his friends in the church, which was really helpful. And people were watching us as we dated, And I think especially with young people, if they can be surrounded by people who are observing and watching them and encouraging them if they think it's a good fit, and then listen to people if they think it's not. If someone's telling you this man or this woman is really not going to be a good person for you for the long run, and you have 5 or 6 key people in your life saying that, pay attention. They're not trying to be mean, they're trying to protect you. And so I think not trying to be accountable is important. Community. I'll answer that by saying I think sometimes Christians who have a loose faith, if you will, sometimes when there's a crisis, God becomes a crisis counselor because you need him. There's something terribly desperate in your life. But this is important too. Who you're going to marry is important. And so that's a time for you to be on your face or on your knees asking God, do you have an opinion about this? Is there something you would like to tell me about this person? Or you might also be telling the Lord, it seems to me that this is the longing of my heart. I would like to have this kind of person, this kind of marriage, but please, you're my Father, you're my Heavenly Father, and I know that whatever you decide will be the best for me because my human wisdom is limited. So encouraging people that God isn't there to be a killjoy. He's not there to make you have, be a miserable human being. He died so you could have an abundant life. He wants to give you everything. He wants to give you every good gift, and that includes a partner, if that's the longing of your heart. So include him in the conversation and cultivate your faith. Your faith grows like your muscles, like anything else. Cultivate your faith. Don't just sit back and expect. You don't expect that you're going to hear from the Lord if you don't ask him and don't make time to listen to him, right?
Well, one of the things that I learned is that the women were all afraid and the men were scared to continue, but they pursued. And that's what has given them the successful pursuit that they had, because the men didn't give up.
He had a hard time,
yeah.
and
just
the
love
women.
her. Just love her the way Christ loved the church.
And we found that the women, as it turns out, all of the women that we interviewed were quite frightened at first when they didn't know that this man who was pursuing them was interesting to them, and they didn't get it, and they weren't terribly. One of them even said, "He'll make the most wonderful husband, but just not for me." And so that gentleman, they're married today, but he had to overcome that perception that he wasn't right for her. And The women were very frightened, and they really had to lean on the Lord to hear from them, for the Lord to sort of speak and say, this might be someone you want to explore, not someone you need to run away from. So the women had to lean in on their faith a lot, and the men had to find the strength and the courage to keep risking
going.
and risk the rejection.
Thus the Lord saying what he said to me, just love her, because not that she would be my mate, but just to continue to love her.
And another important thing is we discovered that God had purposes for every couple as a team. He wasn't just marrying you for you to be husband and wife, but he had a purpose. Just like he has a purpose for our own lives, he has a purpose for each married couple. And so it was important who you marry. You want to marry someone who is spiritually compatible with you and a good fit for you, because God has plans for you as a couple. And so it's important. That's another thing that became really obvious for us.